Welcome to the part 2 of the OpenAI API with Python. In this video, we're going to look at a second way of accessing the OpenAI API, which is sending direct HTTP requests. This method requires the developer to manually construct the HTTP headers and the JSON payload for each request. I know, it sounds very complicated, but why would you want to use this method, you might ask? Well, in my opinion, there are really two major reasons. First is it provides more control and flexibility. It allows you to manually construct your requests and customize for special needs. And the second point is the portability. Because it doesn't rely on a specific Python library, you can switch to a different environment or programming language. However, with greater freedom comes greater responsibility. It does require you to have a deeper understanding for the HTTP protocol and OpenAI's API. If you haven't watched my first video on OpenAI API with Python, where I talk about how to use the OpenAI Python package, how to set up your API key and use it properly, you can go ahead and watch that one. Once you watch that, come back to this video. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. I'm just going to start by organizing my file structure a little bit. As you can see, I've created a new folder here called part 2 HTTP. So in there, I will create a new file. I will call this file direct http.py. Okay, once that's created, we're going to download one library, which is the requests library. I will just do pip install requests. Okay, I do already have it downloaded. Now we can just import everything we need. So the first steps are exactly the same as the last video. I will just copy the code in here. What we're doing is we're loading an environment variable, and we've set up our API key in the .env file, and we set our API key as the environment variable. The model we're going to use is the GPT 3.5 variable. Okay, once we have these things set up, we're going to define a few variables, and the first one is the endpoint. For an API call, we will need to put an URL as an endpoint. We can find that over here on the API reference at create check completion. We can see the post request and they give you an URL. This will be the endpoint we will be accessing. I will just copy that and paste it in here as a string. Okay, that's one variable. We're going to define our messages. Inside of the messages is the conversation we're having with our chatbot, in which I will use the append method. The first row is a system. The second one, which is the user message, I will just append. The row is user, and the content, I will ask the chatbot which city in the US has the largest population. Once we have the messages, we can start to define our JSON payload. How it works is it sends the payload to the model as a post request. The API will get the request and send back a response. So you will see some parameters that's familiar in here. It's a JSON object. This is how you can define a JSON object. So the model inside are the parameters, the actual payload to send. So the model will be the GPT model. We will have the messages here, and then we can define temperature. In this case, I want it to be very accurate, so I'll just put 0. All right. Inside here, you can also have other parameters such as max token and stream data. We won't get into in this video. We just want to see how to use it. We need to define the headers, which is also an object. Headers in an HTTP request provide additional parameters for the HTTP transaction. They carry information for both the request and the response. Inside of the headers, usually there are different types of input. In this case, we will have the content type and the authorization, which I will just paste in here. The content type just specifies the format of the data being sent in the request. In this case, the content type is JSON, and this lets the server know how to interpret the data it received. Authorization, it's the mechanism for the client to identify itself to the server, which is your API key. We're using this pair scheme with the API key. Okay, once we have these things all set up over here, we're going to use the requests library, and we're going to send a post request. And inside here, we will have the endpoint and send the headers. We will also have the JSON payload that we defined. Okay, let's just print this out and see the results. I'm going to save this file and we are just going to run this file. I will go into the project directory, we will run this file, and let's see what will happen. As you can see, we got a response, and the response is called response 200. That means it successfully got a response. But what we're interested is what's inside. How do we see what's inside? Very easy. We just need to call response.json. And now if I save this, run this again, as you can see, we got a response that we can actually read. And in this case, the content is the city with the largest population in the US is New York City, which I think it's true. We're only interested in the content in this case. So what we will do is we can just put it like this. And now if I call it again, voila, this is the content of the response. Lastly, when you are building an application, it will be nicer if you package everything inside of a function. We will just build a utility function so that we can reuse it. I'm going to create a new file called util.py. To make it a little nicer, I will download another package. It's called Tenacity. So pip install Tenacity. Okay. And then after that's installed, I will just paste in all the necessary libraries. Don't worry about the squiggly lines underneath. So what it does is it allows you to access these nice functionalities. Let's just set up the API key as usual and start building the function. What we will do is that we will use the Tenacity package and we will make a decorator for this function. It's called retry. So what this does is every time we call the function, if it fails, it will retry it until after 3 times. Yeah, let's start to define the function. I will call this chat completion request. And inside here, we will take messages and the chat model. All right. Now, inside of the function, we will first define the headers and our JSON payload. Next, we will do a little more fancy. I'm just going to paste the code inside. We will take a look. So what this block of code does is that it will try to send a post request to the OpenAI endpoint. If it succeeds, then it will return the response. If it fails, it will print out an error. Pretty straightforward. The function now is completed. To call this function, we just need to define the messages. In this case, we're just using the same conversation. We will just define chat response as chat completion request. We're just going to pass messages in. The model is using default. Next, we will just extract the JSON from the response and print out the message. Let's take a look. If I save this, run this file. Okay, we can see that it gave out the message. The assistant says the city in the US with the largest population is New York City with over 8 million residents. All right, that is it for how to use the OpenAI API with direct HTTP request. Also, guys, if you like this video, please subscribe. It's completely free. You can always change your mind. Stay tuned for the next video.